Welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. I am Dr. Ashok Gellu. Today I am going to discuss about biodiversity. What is biodiversity? Biodiversity is the combination of two words. Bio means life, diversity means variation. The diversity among the species living in the natural environment is called biodiversity. Every living organism in the living world is unique in nature. This unique in nature itself shows by the organisms, species. The biodiversity concept was introduced by Edward Wilson in 1985. The concept of biodiversity was discussed and popularized in Rio Summit. It organized in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. The Biodiversity Convention on Biological Diversity, which was developed and signed by 157 governments in 1992. It was the first convention about the biodiversity. The Earth Summit signed by 193 parties means 193 countries signed on this agreement to conserve the biodiversity. According to the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, biodiversity means the variability among living organisms from all the sources including inter alia, terrestrial, marine and other aquatic organisms and ecological complexes of which they are part. This include diversity within species, between species and of ecosystems. The variation in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. The aquatic ecosystem is marine and freshwater. These both are different ecosystems. They vary in their biodiversity. These biodiversity we can measure in different levels based on the variability of the species. First one is genetic diversity. Variation in genes or chromosomal structure in the living organisms. The variation of the genes may differ in color and size of the species and shape and aroma of the different plants and nutrients contents of different grains in the plant products. This is all about the genetic diversity. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice and 1000 varieties of mangoes and different varieties of agricultural products. They depend on the variation of the genes. The gene information may differ from species to species, organisms to organism. Bacterium Escherichia coli contain 4000 genes and Oryza sativa 32,000 to 35,000 of genes and man 35,000 to 45,000 of genes contain the differences. These three levels of biodiversity we measure. First one is genetic and then species diversity and next one is the community and ecosystem diversity. The genetic diversity depend on the variation of the genes. Species diversity difference between the species and the community or ecosystem diversity, they differ in the ecosystems. For example, desert ecosystem and marine ecosystem, they have specific habitat, they live in their nature. The first one is the genetic diversity and next one is the species diversity. Species diversity consists of species richness and the number of species and species evenness and relative abundance of the species. They differ in the species richness. The number of the species present in the ecosystem is called species richness and the abundance of the species is nothing but the different species in any ecosystem is called abundance of the species. For example, Western Ghats have greater amphibians and Eastern Ghats contain more plant varieties. The variation may be place to place. There is a longitudinal gradients are impact the species diversity. Species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator to poles, because different temporal variations, climatic variations impact the diversity. A forest in a tropical region like equator has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in the temperate region. In tropical environments, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal and relatively more constant and predictable weather. So, it is impact on the species diversity. Such constant environments promote niche specialization, means particular species live in the area and lead to greater species of diversity. The more solar energy available in the tropics, so they contain the high species diversity and they contribute higher productivity in the nature. And the species richness, richness is refers to number of species. Here individuals are genetically or functionally related, and next one is the species evenness. Evenness is proportion of species or functional groups of present in that particular area. A site with low evenness indicate the few species dominate the site. We can take a forest as example for this species richness and evenness. When observe a patch of the forest, we may observe some plants and animals, while compared to another forest patch, they contain low number of species and differentiate in their plants and animals. Next one is the ecosystem diversity. It is the difference between the different ecosystems. In our nature, we have different ecosystems like forest, deserts and grasslands and polar regions and mountains. These are all the different ecosystem. They contain specific environmental and climatic nature. They are different in the species diversity. For example, in deserts, camels are surviving. In other forests, we cannot observe this type of species. And in polar bears, they present in the glaciers and other same climatic regions. In these ecosystems, keystone species play important role because they provide shelter to many plants and animals. For example, banyan tree, on this banyan tree many birds can live and they depend on the banyan tree for shelter and fruits as a food. And this ecosystem, pollinators are another important species. They improve the biodiversity by spreading the pollinates, means different seeds and fruits. For example, birds are the best example for the pollinators. They spread the pollens to one plants to one plant. The bees are also useful to pollination. Megadiversity. What is megadiversity? Those having the largest biodiversity, including large number of endemic species. Endemic species means they are going to extinct in near future. They are in the threat due to different reasons in the environment. The mega diversity countries are those that house of the largest indicates of biodiversity includes large number of endemic species. India is the one of the mega biodiversity country. This mega diversity concept proposed by Russell Mittermeier in 1988 to raise the awareness of the protection of the biodiversity, particularly in countries where where this is more abundant and threatened species are available. Although they only account around 10% of the earth's surface, mega diversity countries house at least 70% of the planet's terrestrial biological diversity. They contain 70% of the diversity in mega diversity countries. The United Nations Environment Program World Conservation Monitoring Center WMC has identified 17 mega diversity countries, in that India having the 5th place among the 17 mega biodiversity countries. These 17 mega biodiversity countries are Australia, Brazil, China, Colombia, Ecuador and United States, India, Indonesia, Madagascar, Malaysia, etc. These are the all the mega diversity countries in the world. Brazil is richest in biodiversity, placing the first position in the world. India has many regions like biogeographic regions, which are based on the climatic conditions and topography of the area and soil types and different biodiversity. The India differentiated by biogeographic zones. These zones are further divided into 27 biogeographic provinces. The country occupies 2.5% of world area with 8.10% of total biodiversity in our country. In that, only 33% are plants. The biodiversity is differentiated between the different biogeographic zones of the India. First one is the Trans-Himalayan zone. This zone includes Tibetan Plateau, Ladakh mountains and Himalayan Sikkim. It is very cold and arid with spare alpine steppe vegetation, wild species and goat community in the world. And Himalayan zone, it is a very cold zone, it comprising wild sheep and leopards. For example, Ladakh is the very cold area. And desert zone, the zone includes the Thar and the Kutch deserts. This zone having specific species of plants and animals in this region. Next one is the semi-arid zone. The semi-arid zone example is the Gujarat and Punjab, comprising the semi-arid zone plants and animals we cannot find in other biogeographic zones. Western Ghats, it is the richest in the biodiversity among the other different biogeographic zones. Next one is the Deccan Plateau, it is the very important zone because it comprising the 42% of the country's land. The zone includes Deccan Plateau, South and Central Plateau and Eastern Plateau of the India. The Gangetic Plain, this zone contain the river of Ganga. Next, Gangetic East Zone, Northeast Zone. This zone include highest precipitation received in this region. For example, Cherrapunji having the highest rainfall area, and tropical, moist and deciduous forests are the main forest types in this northeast zone. And coastal zone, coastal biogeographic zone has a coastline of about 7,516 kilometers with massive mangrove vegetation is the characteristic of the coastline area. For example, Ratnagiri in Maharashtra and Pichavaram near Chennai are having the coastline regions. Island zone. The zone includes different islands of India and Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar spreaded with massive mangrove trees and beech forest and best evergreen forest preserved in this region, preserved in this islands zone. For example, Rhizophora, Dipterocarpus and Cauliflorum are the major types of plants available in this biogeographic zone. Next one is the value of biodiversity. Every species of plant and animal having specific value in the nature, they contribute to our natural environment. Various species of plants and animals and microorganisms enable the species in the system has its own role and own importance in the present environment. Value of biodiversity. It provides food, fodder and fuel for livestock and housing material and different medicines, and it also useful for spiritual sustenance. Hundreds of millions of small farmers and fisher folk, hunter gathers a substantial number of tribal that depend on the diversity of the species. The genetic diversity and ecosystem diversity is the major role in the biodiversity. The value of biodiversity, two types, direct use value and indirect use value. The direct use value of biodiversity is consumptive value. The biodiversity or their products can harvested and consumed directly from environment for food, fuel and fiber and for different medicines and different household accessories we get from this biodiversity, and also wood, weather, different resins, paints, rubber, timber we can get from this natural biodiversity. For example, food, human consume different wild plants as food for surveillance of the human beings. Almost 8,000 species of plants identified. These identified species are we are using for food. In that 200 species of plants domesticated for human being. Norman Mayer in 1957 reported 8,000 species of edible plants, in that only around 5,000 species are used for food in every day. 90% present food from tropical plants, fruits, vegetables, tea and coffee powder are we are getting from this biodiversity. These are all about the consumptive value as food. The major crops, rice and corn, majorly 1/3 of the population depending on this biodiversity. It is using as food security for the human beings. Asia producing wild variety of rice. The scientific name of rice is Oryza sativa. It is the Indian origin, and next consumptive value is medical value. Many wild plants used to develop the toxins and different medicines to treat the diseases. For example, medicines we are treating cancer and other diseases. Cinchona bark, this used to malaria Medication, present use of drugs, 25% of drugs derived from 120 species of different plants. We are altering the plants for medicines. The natural medicinal products we are getting from this biodiversity. Aspirin using as anti-inflammatory, and bees venom we use for arthritis disease, cure the arthritis disease, and penicillium we are regularly using as antibiotic. So, biodiversity is important for human health because it provides plants, animals and fungi that use it to make the different medicines. These medicines includes antibiotics, painkillers and vitamins. The biodiversity providing all these to our human beings as well as other living organisms. The medicinal plants we synthesize chemical compounds to use it to treat the diseases, and this biodiversity contributing in drug discovery and traditional medicine. Many cultures have used these natural products as medicines since prehistoric times. In modern medicine, often uses compounds that come from the biodiversity. And food availability, biodiversity provide a variety of foods that are available in different season. Season to season we get different food products from plants. And food resilience, biodiversity helps make production systems more resilient to shocks and stresses. For example, when erosion and tsunamis occur, this food is useful to survive the human beings. And food safety, biodiversity can provide safety net for vulnerable households during the times of crisis. Any crisis we require food for our surveillance. Income opportunities with this biodiversity for rural people, for timber they are using in households for cooking food products. Reduced resilience on external inputs, biodiversity can reduce the need for food and agricultural produces. These are costly and environmentally harmful inputs. And productive value is the second useful value. The productive use values are timber, fishery. Timber is the economic value because internationally trading this timber, the biodiversity is the variety of life on the earth, and timber is a good that come from the variety of the forest. In India, take Tectona grandis is wild variety, we are using timber and it exporting internationally. And biodiversity also providing pulp and paper, the raw material we are providing to industries. Next one is the fishery. This is the productive use value. Fishery is the trading use value. It included national income accounts depend on this fishery value. And indirect value. Indirect value of biodiversity is the benefits that come that receive from the biodiversity without physically using it. For example, pollination, bees and other insects pollinate plants which helps plants reproduce in the environment. Carbon sequestration, nowadays pollution levels are increasing due to the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere. The plants can absorb this carbon dioxide levels, carbon dioxide convert in the photosynthetic process, and the plant can produce the food, and also it decreases the carbon dioxide emissions in the natural environment. It is also called sequestration, carbon sequestration. Water regulation. Biodiversity helps to regulate the water, precipitation and evaporation processes. It is the natural hydrological cycle. It regulates with this biodiversity. And erosion control. Biodiversity helps to control the erosions in coastal areas. Mangroves and other large plants can prevent from this soil erosion. Next one is the soil fertility. Different microflora help the soil fertility. They degrade the organic materials, they compose the organic content in the soil, they can improve the fertility of the soil naturally. By using these microflora, different microorganisms involved in this fertility improvement. And weather buffering. Biodiversity helps to protect against extreme weather conditions like floods, droughts, storms. Air and water purification. Many of the plants can purify the water and also they provide air to the our human beings and living organisms. Habitat and other species. Biodiversity provide habitats for species to live and food chains. These are the important in natural environment to live every organism, because every organism depending on other organisms to their surveillance for food. For example, birds can depend on plants in the forest ecosystem. A food chain is a model that shows how energy and nutrients moving through the ecosystem. In the biodiversity, producers to decomposers all are involved in this food chain. They shows their energy, how it is moving, how the nutrients are coming from producers to decomposers, from decomposers to producers, how the nutrients are transferring, we can see in the food chains. So far we have discussed what is biodiversity, what is the importance of the biodiversity, what are the uses of the biodiversity. The uses we discussed two types, direct use values and indirect use values. Direct use values of biodiversity, food value and medicine value. For our surveillance, we are getting food from the biodiversity, from plants and animals, and medicines we are getting from different plant sources in the forest ecosystem. And indirect use values, purification of the water, purification of the air and food chains. Different food chains are involved in indirect use value, and different spiritual and social and cultural values. These are helps to survive the living world. So, the biodiversity is important not only for human beings, it is useful for all the living organisms in the earth.